Today is the final daf of Masechta Zevachim, and we'll have a siyum. So we are up to Daf Kufyud Betes Amud Beis, right by the wide lines, by the two daf, 4 lines above the white lines. And basically, the Mishnah is highlighting the differences between a bama ketana, that when you have your own backyard bama, and if you did it in the bama gedola, in the large one. And there are many differences, including the fact you don't need a koyin, you don't need the clothes of a koyin, you don't have to wash your hands before. And one of the differences was that the line, there was a line, a red line that divided the mizbeach. The top half of the mizbeach is where you sprinkled the blood of the chatas, and the bottom half is where you did the oila. That doesn't exist by a bama ketana. So it comes along Rambam Chama and gives us 2 different views regarding that, and that's going to be basically if you had a mind to do it in a bama ketana, and then you brought it up on a bama gedola. If you had a mind to bring this animal, your own personal animal donation, but you had a mind to bring it to the big mizbeach, and then you actually did bring it to the big mizbeach, but it was your own personal thing. What happens then? And so on. We'll see. There are 3 opinions. 3 opinions. So says the Gemara. Omar. Amar Ramachama, the first word of the line, 2 lines above the wide lines. Amar Ramachama, said Ramachama, when do we say that a bama gedola has this mechitza and you have to follow the rules? Ella b'kotche. Now, there's a lot of different versions of the Gemara. We're going to learn the version of Rashi, which is a little bit different than our Gemara has. Shtigebetzes tells us, puts a few extra words, because if you look at Rashi's pshat, it's hard to understand unless you follow the gifts of the Shtigebetzes. So, this is the problem with a lot of your Gemaras in Kotchim. Lo yishanu ela b'kotche bama ketana. It's talking about v'hikim bama ketana. You had in mind a bama ketana. You had a mind to do it in the bama ketana. You did a bama ketana. So that's what the Mishnah says. There's no laws of a red line in between. We don't care if you bring the oil on top. It doesn't make a difference. Aval b'kotche bama ketana de kavina bama gedola. But the kotchim that you shechted for a bama ketana, and then you brought it inside to the gedola, then yesh chitzi. Then there is, in other words, if you had in mind to bring it on the bama gedola, your own private carbon, not talking about a carbon simna, your own private carbon, and you actually brought it on the bama gedola, then you have to follow the rules of the halfway line, all that, yeah. That's what it says here. It says the Gemara Moshe, Rabbi asks a question that says, we had before already, Chazei v'shoik, the gift that you give a coin, for example, the Chazei v'shoik, of a shlamim, or lachmei toida, the 1 out of every 10 breads, the 4 different kinds of breads, the matzahs, you give it to the coin. Noigin bekochim bama gedola. It says there that this is followed by those kochim on the bama gedola. The ein noigin bekochim bama ketana, but not on the kochim bama ketana. It sounds from here. I don't care what you had in mind. It sounds from this Bryce here. If you brought it up on the bama gedola, you follow the rules of bama gedola. You just said that if it's a carbon that was shaykh to the bama ketana, even if you brought it on the bama gedola, you don't have if you had in mind bama ketana, and then you brought it in the bama gedola, you don't have to follow the rules. I sorry. You said that if it was a bama ketana, and then you brought it up on the bama gedola, then you don't have to follow the rules. Only if you had in mind the bama gedola. Here it says it makes no difference what you had in mind. Who cares what you had in mind? All that matters is you brought it the bama gedola, you followed the bama gedola. You said that if you had in mind a bama ketana, then you brought it on the bama gedola, you don't have to follow the rules of bama gedola. In this brayse, it seems it makes no difference. It just matters where did you bring it, not what you had in mind. Amos say noyagin bibba magdoila they noyagin bibba magtana. Don't read the word big kotche. Read words, but noyagin bibba magdoila magtana. Say that if it's a carbon that belongs in bama gedola, that's when you follow these rules. If it's a carbon that belongs in bama ketana, you don't follow the rules. The way I just said it doesn't matter that you actually brought it on a bama gedola. That's one version. Ikidami, another version is Amar Ramachama lo yishanu. But when does this rule apply? That there's no din of chitzui. When do you say that there are rules of chitzui? That there are rules of that dividing line? Ela bizman b'magdoila v'hikrivam b'magdoila. You have to add the word bizman. In that time when there was no such thing as a bama ketana, only a bama gedola. So then you brought. Then the din is you have to have all these rules, including the rule of this dividing line. Avo bisman koche bamaktana, but at the time when bamagtanas were permitted, then Aflak the kavina bamagdala. I don't care where you brought it. I don't care even if you had in mind the bamagdala. Even if you had it in mind, because the first day it says if you had in mind the bamaktana and you brought a bamagdala, then you don't have to follow the rules. No, but if you did have in mind the bamagdala, you do. The second opinion says no. In the time when bam was permitted, even if you had in mind the bamagdala, you don't have to bring it. Ein chitzi. Lema, so let's say Messiah. Now we can support him according to this because it says in the Braisa, it sounds like that that if you that if the kachim belong in the Bamaktana, even though you had in mind the Bamagdala, and even though you brought a Bamagdala, you'd know din of mechitza, which supports the second view of Rambam. You can take away the word kachim and say. But no, that it follows that anything you put on Bamagdala, you're chayiv. Anything you put on Bamagdala, you're not chayiv. So no raya one way or another. So these are two views. Comes along, and this all argues with Rabbi Lazar, because Rabbi Lazar said that an oilas bombas yachid shechnisa b'fnim. Rabbi Lazar says that the oiler of a bomba yachid. And after you shecht it, again, this is big machlekes Rashi and Taisa, but Rashi learns you brought the animal inside the base of English alive. Rashi learns you shechted the animal, and where did you shecht it? So where did you shecht it? Outside, by Bamaktana. You shecht it in your house, and then you brought it inside to the base of English. He says it kultur mechitz l'chol it now has a din. In other words, I don't care what you had in mind. You Rambam make a whole thing what you had in mind. You didn't mind. I don't care what you had in mind. You bring it into the Bamagdala, it takes on the dinim of its kultur, the Bamagdala takes over, and you're chayiv. So there are three opinions here. So now the Gemara asks, within the opinion of Rabbi Lazar, who says that if you bring you shechted it outside by the Bamagdala, and I don't care what you had in mind, even if you had in mind the Bamagdala, and then you decide to bring it in, it now takes on the dinim of a Bamagdala. So the question now is, okay, what happens, Taka? You took the limb, you brought it inside, and Ablaza says it takes on the dinim of a Bamagdala, right? You need a mechitz and all that. But then you took it right back outside. Mahu.
That's the question. If it takes on all the things,
but it takes on all the things if you bring it onto the Bamagdala. Now, if you bring a Bamagdala, you have to make sure that you follow the rules that the oil goes at the bottom part of the half and the chat. No, the Bamagdala you can have your red line, but it doesn't matter.
Is that you can't take it out, so you can't.
But you did. Oh, but we learned before it potem meklum. If you remember yesterday, we learned when it says there, but if you had a Bamagdala and you brought it in out, it was potem meklum. So Taisa said potem meklum means. If you brought it inside, you should already bring it inside, or even Nachman, you had a mind to bring it inside. At the end, you took it out and brought it back to your own Bamaktana. It's patam meklum l'payil, but yeah, but it's a kosher carbon because the din is you don't really need anything. So what happened here was that you brought it inside, and according to Rabbi it's kailit, but that's if you put it in the mezbecha to follow the rules. The chatlas goes above and the oil below, and your own mezbecha, the backyard, you don't have to follow any rules. You can bring the oil on top. But then you took it back out. Does it revert back to its original thing that you know, don't follow the rules or not? Do we say that the mechitza, that you have the rules, you have to follow the rules or not? Says the Gemara. So in other words, even though it's not really shayir to the Bama Gedolah, it doesn't really belong there. It belongs in your backyard. But once it's there, the question is, does it take on that identity or not? So that's exactly the machlekes. Lav Hainu Plukta the Rabbi Yosef. We have a very similar machlekes, not the exact same details, but the principle is the same. What's the story? That and it says in the Mishnah again. We'll have a lot of Yosef say we're going to follow Rashi's way of learning. The time we learned Kodshesh, because Taisa learns the way it's written in our Gemara, and Rashi learns differently. It's interesting why in our Gemaras usually we have the Gemara, the text is like Rashi, and the Gemara here right now the text is mainly like Taisa, and we're just learning Shitz Rashi. And we learned in the Mishnah, Kotche Kotchim Sheshachten Bedorim. Now, remember Kotche Kotchim, you have to shecht on the north side. The south side is like no different than like outside, right? It's like it's the wrong place. It's like in the time you're doing a Bamaktana when you're supposed to do a Bamaktana. Bamaktana is like Dorim compared to Sofan and Bamaktana. So Kotche Kotche Shachten Bedorim, you did the wrong place. The din is Mayelin Behem. The shchita is worthless. So we know the shchita is mata the mila, right? You're no longer stealing. But the shchita here is worthless, and the expression the Gemara we're learning more is keman chanakti. It's as if you strangled it. Let's say. So our question is, what about olu? Ma'u sheyerdu? If you put it, okay, you shechted it in the Mizbeach HaMikdash on the Doron side. You put it on the Mizbeach. Now, remember, we learned things which are shaykh to the Mizbeach. Once you put it up, even though it's possible, you leave it there. Tumah b'kodesh. Here, it's on the Mizbeach. Do we remove it, or do we say no? Even though you did it b'darim, leave it there. So forget. The first part of the mission says if you shechted, you're still shechted darim is still moil. In other words, we don't say that as if it was. We say that we don't say as if it died and it died. It's not a kosher animal anymore. There's no longer meal. We say that it's still considered an activity. That's what the Mishnah is also saying. Now the question is, as far as the Mizbeach is concerned, what happens? Not as far as Mila is concerned. So Mila is still moil. Opposite what I said before. Mila is still moil. It's not. We don't say, oh, the animal just died like in the Vela and the Mila. No, you shechted it, so it continues. You still have to do, the zikah, even though in this case you won't. Rabba says lo yalu, but lo yerdu. Rabba says that you don't take it down, and Rabbi says yerdu, you take it down. You take it down. So the question will be now. And after Gis, I just said the wrong. Sorry, Rashi's Gis is Rabba Yerdu. Rabba says you don't put it up, you take it down. You take it down. Rabba says Yerdu, you take it down. It doesn't belong in the Mizbeach. And Rabbi Yosef says no, leave it on the Mizbeach. In fact, Rabbi Yosef goes according to Teisha's version, Yalu. Even if it was not on the Mizbeach, you could bring it up. In Rashi's version is if it's already up there, leave it there. So now, the Tiboy Rabbi Yosef. So this is the machlekes of Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, right? That what? Because shechting on the Durham side is like shechting it. It's like a bamuk tana. Once you bring it inside the mizbeach, we say if once it's there, you don't take it away. So over here, what's the question? It was already inside the base of Mikdash, and you took it away. Do we bring it back, or can you leave it already outside? That's the machlekes. Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi says yes, the chal will take it off. It doesn't belong in the base of Mikdash, and Rabbi Yosef says no, leave it on the mizbeach. Bring it back. That's why the way it tastes pshat is better. No, yalu, bring it up, bring it back. Anyway, the Gemara says no. The question is tiboy that Rabbi raises. It's not so poshut because in each one we can still analyze further and ask this very question. Why? I can say there's a difference between the case of shechting and darim and what we're talking about over here is something that was on the bama. You shechted in the bama tana. Now you bring it in, and we'll get and how. So yes. Why Mizbeach? He says, take it down, remove it. The Chazalei Mekadesh, the Chazalei Mekadesh. We learn on the game Mizbeach Yigdosh and says they're only things which are shaykh to the Mizbeach, you're Mekadesh. But if it's not shaykh to the Mizbeach, it's not Mekadesh. And this is not shaykh to the Mizbeach. And the expression is, as far as the Mizbeach is concerned, as if you strangled it. You didn't shecht it. You shechted it on the Durham side. But when it comes to the laws of mechitza, that's a special din, but a special pasuk we learn now when it comes to the mizbeach. But in the laws of mechitza, we don't have that pasuk. Maybe even though since you shechted outside by the bama tana, it doesn't really belong by the bama gdola. But nevertheless, kolto. If you brought it to the bama gdola, maybe it's kolet. Maybe now it takes on the identity. So even though you take it out again, it belongs to the bama gdola. We don't have that special pasuk. So that's one way of looking at it. So you don't know how Rabbi would hold in our case. Or let's go to Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef, who says that what? That you leave it on his beach. It's still in the base of Migdash. You still bought it in the Azar of us. Instead of no, what you did in the south. There's no mechitza dividing it, so we can argue it's connected somehow. It's contiguous. Once on his beach, leave it there. It's not like Dorim and Suffolk. This is a big Bamaktana outside. Exactly. Loi. Teiku. So there remains with a question. Milsa, now the next part of the Gemara we're learning about the is, but it's very difficult to understand according to Rashi. But Milsa, the Pshita the Rabba Chagisa, this that we were so convinced according to Rabba in one way, Rabbi another way. Miboy Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai actually answers the question. No, there's Machlekes Rabbi Yosef once it's on the Mizbeach. They avoid him that you, if you did it at the south side, do you leave him as or not? Rabbi Yanai actually asked as a question. A vore oilas bombas yachid sha'olul mizbech. They avoid him of the oila of a bombas yachid, and you brought it on the mizbech. Biyodi and it went off. Do you put it back on or not? Bombas yachid sha'olul mizbech biyodi. Again, this follows the gifts of Taisus. According to Rashi, do you put it back on or not? Hey, the fire didn't really burn through like the boiler, no question. We said before, the fire didn't burn through, it doesn't belong to his back, you never put it back on. The fire already grabbed a hold of it. My. And the problem with Rashi is we just said that maybe that this is not so clear because this is Trey Mekaimis and this is and Rabbi Yosef talking about you did the south side of the Mizbech. So how do you comparing Rabbi Yanai's Iboye with Rabbi Yosef, which is a little bit of difficulty. And Teiku takes talks about. Right, what have you checked? Now we said Bamas Yachid doesn't have a lot of the rules. Now, some of the rules the Mishnah omits. What about shechting? We know we have to shech by day. What about a bumma, private bumma? Are there also these rules, restrictions that you have to shech by day? You can do that now as well. One of them says kosher. You can do it at night. And one that's puzzle. What's going on here? What's the machlekes? They're arguing Rabbi Loza. They're arguing Rabbi Loza. What do you mean arguing Rabbi Loza? The Rabbi Loza, Rami Kroya, Rabbi Loza asks the following question. Steve, it says that Shol HaMelech said to them, he said, "Be got it. You betrayed me. Why don't you go ahead and reveal a shecht today by this large stone?" So we're talking about you have to shecht by day. Uksiv, and then it says, "Vayom Shol," and Shol said, spread out in the nation, but Martin tell them Hagisha la ish, everyone should bring the ox for ish. What's it actually there? Yeah. So and the lamb. Ushchatetem bazeh yoshech v'chaltem b'leishechtem Hashem, and you shouldn't send the Eibusher lechol al adam. By Yigisha kolam ish shoyden b'yodeh halayla. They brought night by Yishkatu sham. Says clear in the pasuk. And they did shech at night. So which one is it? You're allowed to shech at night. You're not shech at night. He has a stira. So there's a machlekes how to answer this stira. Man Mishani, one of them answers can be chulin, can be kochim. Here he's talking about chulin, you're allowed to shech at night. That's what they shech at night. And when he says do it by day, he's talking about kochim. No, there's no chilik, even though it's a bamas yachid, because they were in the basement. Nevertheless, you have to follow the rules of by day. But man Mishani can be kochim bamagdoila. Those that they brought in the bamagdoila, he said do it by day. And that's what he says by night. So that's the machlekes how to answer the state of these two psukim. Itma we learn oilas bamas yochid. Now another thing, we had a whole discussion about if about an oila. The Torah says you have to strip it from the hide and you have to cut it up in pieces. And we had a machlekes in when it started, for the midbar or it started later. So now we're going to talk about bamas yochid. If you brought a donation an oila, which has to follow the same rules, but in the bamas yochid, do you have to have shevin tuach or not? Itmar oilas bamas yachid. Rav says ein tuuna hefshe v'natuach. Does not require hefshe v'natuach. In the own backyard, you don't have to strip it from the hide and cut it up pieces. But Rabbi Yechonah says tuuna hefshe v'natuach. And what's the base of that argument? The Kamiflim are arguing with the Rabbi Yossi. They're arguing in the Rabbi Yossi Haglili. The Tanya we learned Rabbi Yossi Haglili said oila shehi krivu Yisrael b'mitzvah. It said the oila that the Eden brought in the midbar. Ain't tuuna hefshed netuach. The oil they brought in the midbar did not have hefshed and netuach. Why? She'ain heshed v'netuach ella ma'oil moyed ve'elech. In other words, when they brought in the midbar in Parshas Shemot, they brought in Bahar Sinai. They brought their they brought the eilus and everything else right before Matan Torah. So when did the laws of the Hasis hefshed to start? Only when the Mishkan was constructed. Much 9 months later, so they didn't have it. So therefore, now the question is, what's the shot? And therefore, from oil but everywhere. Even though the only thing they had in the midbar was the Mishkan and didn't have any bombas, but nevertheless, once you put the rule in, it goes across the board. Hold, it started in Bamaktana, but not by Bamaktana. Why? Because just like before oil moed, when they did Bamaktana, before by Matan Torah, when they did Kabbanis, there was no Mishkan or anything else, so that's a Bamaktana. And we see there that in that Bamaktana, they didn't have Hefshev V'Netuach. So therefore, the same thing. Once there's no Mishkan anymore, and you have Bamaktanas, go back to the rule. You don't need Hefshev V'Netuach. The differences between a Bamagdoila and a Bamaktana are Keren and Kevesh. These are a number of differences we had before. Keren, whether you need kronos, the corners, and Kevesh, whether you had to have a ramp. Yisoid, no, was the actual template of the Mizbech. Your Bamaktana has to look the same. V'ribu, a square, it only applies to Bamagdoila. Even in the time Bamas, in the Bamagdoila, which actually they use the Mizbech of the Mishkan anyway. Vein Keren. There's no laws of Keren or Yisoid or Kevesh ramp or Ribu, a square, the Bamaktana. Then it continues. Here, when it comes to the kier, the kanoi and the base, is the bamagdela. Is a requirement, but the kier, the kanoi, bamaktana. Chazei v'shoik, that this you give the presents to a kohen is only b'magdola. Chazei v'shoik b'magtana. Then it says, Varim, this Braisa says, Varim sheshavsa b'magdola b'magtana. What are certain dinim that they have in common? Shchita, shechting, obviously, b'magdola tana. Hefshit bin the tuach. It says clearly here that hefshit and the tuach, which is a requirement by a carbon oiler, is b'gdola b'tana. Dam matir umefagel, the law that you spray the blood properly, that enables you to continue eating meat, or if you had in mind the wrong times for eating and all that, is mefagel. Same, like Doyle and like our Mishnah says, the three things are the same: pigul, noiser, and tummy. Mumin. Interesting. Our Mishnah doesn't talk about mumin. Don't know why the Mishnah omits that. Mumin, if an animal has a mum, there's no difference. Doyle and Tana. There's man, and the same thing about the times that you can eat the animals. There's no difference of big doyle and Ketana. But what do we have clearly from here? That hefshir tuach is a requirement even in your backyard. Something when I write that abel noise, the Mishnah concludes in this long Mishnah we had, but noise, the laws of noise left over from the carbon, and zman, and the laws about pigul, and tameh, the laws of tameh. Interesting machlekes Rashi and Rambam what exactly the laws of tameh are, and it seems from Rashi that Rashi learns that we're talking about the food itself is tameh, and from the Rambam writes that it's talking about the kohen. We don't, or the person's makir. We don't care if it's tameh when it comes to a bama. And the Rambam, and this is all the Acharayim talking about. The Rambam says the chayin koser b'gemara, and there's no gemara. We'll soon see. There's no such gemara, so it starts a whole controversy. Does Rambam have a lot of different gemaras than we do? Because he says chayin b'food is gemara. I think he says, and we don't have it. So what's pshat? Does that explain a lot of other things that Rambam had that we don't have, or does it? The Rambam is medayik from a gemara we had before? So everyone talks about what exactly what it means over here. The Rambam said the chaim of food is gemara. Anyway, you want to continue?
What if it is man? That means the time of the carbon.
No, you said it. No, you said the fixed time of the carbon. What's nicer? No, you said it
over the time.
Exactly. So you have a fixed time, and then beyond that is nicer. Zman is pigul. If you had in mind the wrong time, or Yisrael, whatever it is, yeah. Then the Gemara, I thought about me to learn. How do you know this is a problem? The Torah says, Lon Yisarif, right? If it's nicer, you have to burn, and it says Pigul Yisarif, and Pigul it says you have to burn as well. We learn out Ma Pigul possible b'bama, just like Pigul is possible by a bama, we learn of an oven. Is Af Lon possible b'bama? So Lon also is possible b'bama. The din of nicer possible b'bama. That's one we're learning. Or maybe Klachadel maybe no. The Ha'am the Torah says Lon Yisarif. Torah says elsewhere Lon you should burn. The Yaitse Yisarif. By the story of Ad and another of you, Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to work out what happened here. It didn't go out. And Yaitse you have to burn. Ma Yaitse kosher b'bama. The whole idea of bama is that there's no Yaitse because you're not in the base of English. So Af Lon kosher b'bama. Maybe the whole idea of Lon and all that is kosher by bama. So that's what we're asking. How do you know? How do you know? You don't have to know anyway. It's a kalvachayim from oifas, from birds. What's a kalvachayim? Madach oifas, madach birds. We learned that tammuz and bezachrus does not apply by bird, only if it's missing a whole limb. But if it's not missing a whole limb, it doesn't apply. So there's no din of mum. Yet Zman Paisel Ben, and yet Zman passels by them. We learn that from a show that Zman passels by birds. Is Koche Bamaktana, the Koche Bamaktana, Shahamum Paisel Ben, and the mum passels by them. Ain't a din, Shazman Paisel Ben. So Zman also passes by them. The Kabachaymer. No, if you're going to rely on a Kalvachayman, I can undermine the Kalvachayman. I can say, Mala Oifas, you know why Oifas were not, what do you call it? By Oifas, we don't care about Mum Shekain, Ein Hazar Kosher Ben. We can say that, sorry, you know why by Oifas it's man as a psul? Because there's another Chumra by Oifas. Ein Hazar Kosher Ben. You can't have Yisrael do Malika, only a Kohen do Malika. If you have this kula by a Bamaktana that a Zor, a Yisrael, can bring the carbon, maybe also. Yeah, maybe they can do. Maybe there's no din of noiser or of lon when it comes to bamaktana. Is man possible? Maybe not possible. If someone else wants to finish over here,
and this is the din of Zevach Shlamim. Last is man bamaktana is man bamagdela. So we see that man will apply to both bamaktana and bamagdela.
Okay.
Adonallah, paraschatos, sleepallah, and
okay. I'll do everybody. We have a little muzayna sit. We forgot to read mashka.